gentlemen, good afternoon. Friends of Europe is delighted as always to be taking part in this very successful trade and investment partnership summit. Thank you again, Sunil, for inviting us to take part. I'm Shada Islam, I'm Director for Europe and Geopolitics at Friends of Europe. So before we start this panel discussion on India, Brexit and the European Union, I have a confession to make. For the last 4 days, I have actually been stalking, following Theresa May while she was being in India. No, really, I've been in India as well. I've been following her every move, reading everything she said, her meetings with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, her encounters with business executives, her visits to the tech convention. Okay, so in a post-truth world, I'm not telling you exactly everything I did. But I was in India, I was in Mumbai, and it's a bit of an exaggeration, really, but I think she really didn't get the kind of glowing headlines and the glowing reception. She got a good reception, but she didn't get the headlines that she was expecting. I think I enjoyed myself slightly more than she did. So, what did she go for? She went for Britain that is agile, nimble, post-Brexit, can do all these deals very quickly because the European Union, such a plodding elephant, so rigid, can't get things done, so many conditions, so many ideas, very complicated. Britain alone can do it. Well, let's see if it's going to turn out that way. While I was there, the Times of India talked about a very muddled May coming to India. Another newspaper said May had come with a begging bowl. Silver, but still a begging bowl. And there was a lot of talk about, trade actually does mean immigration as well. So I'm not sure that that's the kind of headline she was expecting. And it became clear to me that negotiating a free trade agreement between Britain and India would probably also be quite complicated. Actually, last night as I was leaving Mumbai, and this will be interesting for you, the talk on the television screen was about the smog in Delhi, the big problem in Delhi. Speculation about Rahul Gandhi's elevation as head of the Congress party was that. And then, of course, the dispute between Tata and Mistry. That Mistry at Tata Group. Not a word about Theresa May or Brexit. So, the panel I have here, this is the question I'm going to ask you. What does Brexit mean for India? Does it mean that it's going to be able to do all kinds of ambitious things that it couldn't do with the poor, slow, plodding European Union? So to discuss this with me, I have the one and only Shishir Bajoria, slow to come to the stage, but fast when it comes to responding to questions. Chairman of the Bajoria Group and a member of the BJP. Also the pleasure of having Gareth Price, Senior Research Fellow, Asia Program at Chatham House, come down from post-Brexit Britain. Gareth? Immigration controls, visas? Not yet. Madhu Sharma, UK member of the European Economic and Social Committee, also director and founder of the Madhu Group, which does all kinds of business deals worldwide, British as well. Pratik Dattani, UK country director of FICCI, the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, based in London. Lots of interesting things to say about what it means to be an Indian businessman in Britain today. And last but not least, my friend Veronica Cody, Head of Division for Regional Affairs, India, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Bhutan at the EEAS here in Brussels. Shishir, I'm going to start off with you. So, lots of speculation, hard Brexit, soft Brexit, scrambled Brexit, uncertainty about what's going to happen. Will the members of Parliament in Britain be involved? Will the mother of all parliaments be part of this discussion or not? What impact is that having on Indian business like yourselves? What are you thinking? What are your plans? Are you holding back?
Well, when you were posing the questions, I was wondering if we are talking about the menu for breakfast. Hard-boiled eggs or soft-boiled eggs or scrambled eggs or what? But before we talk of Brexit, well, first of all, Brexit has not happened. An opinion poll has happened on 23rd of June. But I don't know how, the impression has been created that Brexit has happened. But it's not. Before we talk of Brexit, let's talk of the EU. a very quick look at the history of EU. 1952, 6 countries got together to defend the coal and steel industry. Germany, France, Italy, and the 3 Benelux countries. The same 6 in 1957 formed the European Community. And this grew to a strength of 13 in 1994, but then suddenly grew to 28 by 2004, 2003. Why I wanted to, all of you ladies and gentlemen know this, but just to refresh your memory, that EU was all about trade. EU is all about trade and industry. The very fact it was started for steel and coal, that was for the core sector. Core has not changed. The core does not change. You have the fourth revolution, all that's good, but the core still remains. Now, finally, when the Brexit happens, if it happens, it can happen. I'm not debating whether it will happen or not. It's the sovereign right of a country. But where does this sovereign right, where the people's will be expressed? I, for one, feel that there's only one place for people's will to be expressed, is on the floor of the parliament, not in a referendum. And that's what the High Court just the other day has ruled. I now move more towards business. See what happened after this 23rd of June referendum vote. Economy, business went into a kind of a free fall, and I use the term free fall more for the currency. Politically, UK was hit by a tsunami. A prime minister who had just won a huge majority overnight found he was no more in 10 Downing Street. He was out. The person who said, whose party's formal line was BREXIT, after attaining the referendum vote, he exited. And many such things happened. Labour Party wanted the chief out and the chief said, I won't go. So the tsunami hit Britain politically. But on the business front, this currency going into a tailspin, and let me give it in euro context instead of dollar. From 1.31 it dropped to 1.09. Now, okay, one way of looking at it is good for exports. But let's not forget, UK is a net importing country. Number 2, all the foreign investments in UK, all of a sudden looked at a 25% reduction in their asset value. All this creates a mess. But see, something else happened just 4 days back when the High Court said, no, this cannot be. I mean, the ultimate will of the people will be in the floor of the parliament. The currency again improved. What does it show? The currency, the euro, improved to 1.13. That means instability is not good for economics. Especially, now let's look at Europe and UK separately. And let's look at EU 27. See, this entire area was going through a fragile recovery. But there was a recovery. From 0.4% GDP growth in 2013 in the EU area, it went to 0.9% in 2015. And in second quarter 2016, it dropped back to 0.4. See, economics does not like these uncertainties. If there's an exit, so be it. If they do a floor test, and if the people's will is exit, so be it. But that will mean a definitive thing, not this uncertainty. And I hope I have answered. I couldn't decide about the breakfast. But one last point, which I must say, you know, when you said about the newspaper coverage about Rahul Gandhi, whether he'll be the next president or not, I always thought, ladies and gentlemen, the crown prince is the king. He is the heir apparent.
Okay, that's not the issue here. I wonder how he feels about Brexit. Shishir, just to follow up, so economics does not like uncertainty. When I was in India just now, nobody seemed to be thinking, oh God, we've got these big plans. You know, there was no such statements or announcements of big investment plans in the UK following, you know, this decision, the High Court and the rest of it. So your sentiment of skepticism, in a sense, is reflective of what's happening in India more generally among the business community.
Personally, my view is the British Prime Minister made a first bilateral visit to India. As an Indian, I welcome it.
Yeah, it was a big thing.
A big thing, of course, and it's good. But to discuss the after effects of Brexit, when it has not happened, in what form will it happen? I thought it was a bit too premature. And that's why you did not find the kind of enthusiasm which you were looking for from Bombay.
Right. So Gareth, thank you, Shishir. Yeah. So Gareth, all this talk of the Commonwealth, in a sense, these long-standing historical civilizational links that Britain has with English-speaking countries across the world, is that going to replace, on the economic side, the European Union? Is that the philosophy we're pursuing in Britain at the moment?
I think the uncertainty drags into that as well. I mean, if you look at Australia, as for instance, before moving on to India, Australia said yes, down the line they wouldn't mind discussing a free trade agreement, but obviously first off they want to know what the UK's relationship with Europe is. So in kind of 9 years' time, they could start talking about something with Europe, but Australia would prioritise a free trade agreement with the EU over the UK on its own. So if that's what we're looking for, it's not going to happen. Thinking through how India came along, India did crop up a few times in the referendum debate, and the logic was, as you alluded to, that the UK trade to India is held back by the EU, and that if we're free, we can go on there and do it. I think basically, if you sort of misdiagnose what the problem is, then you're not going to come up with the correct solution to the problem. And if you look at Germany, for example, Germany's trade with India has gone up 3 times over the last few years because Germany makes a lot of machine tools and exports them to India because as an emerging industrializing country, that's what India is looking for. The things that the UK economy is based on, in large part financial services and legal services, are areas which are closed in India. So that is why our trade with India has not risen. We have a defence relationship with India. We make a lot of engines for aircraft which are sold to India, but they show up in our trade statistics as exports to France, because that's how it is. I think in a lot of these cases, the view from the UK looks a lot more vulnerable if it were to be on its own. In the case of India, a few years ago, people used to sort of proudly boast in the UK that 75% of Indian investment in Europe went to the UK, and 75% of that went to London. And there's clearly a traditional tie, and London is a global city where many Indian business leaders live. As of now, that figure is down. The figure of Indian investments into Europe is only half of it is in the UK, and has dropped significantly in a very short period of time. As Indian businesses have discovered that English is spoken in many other countries in Europe, as one of the main discoveries. What else? And I think the point that Theresa May discovered on the trip to India is that the debate in the UK is very much about immigration, and in the referendum campaign is very much immigration from European countries. But if we want to have trade deals with other countries like India, they're going to want some kind of movement on greater access for IT experts and so forth. And when you think through the EU-India free trade agreement negotiations, one of the things blocking it was labour mobility of Indians. And one of the countries that's most opposed, because of the Indian diaspora in the UK and because visas have been abused in the past by India is the UK. So I think logic suggests that one of the big impediments, if Brexit were to happen, to the EU-India FTA would be removed.
And I think that's something that the newspapers in India were making very clear. So that brings me to you, Madhi. I mean, you have looked a lot at the issues to do with people when it comes to trade. Trade is not just about goods. People are involved with it as producers, as consumers, as workers. So I was just wondering, do you think that an FTA between Britain and India would be something different from what the EU is negotiating at the moment, which is, sort of going on, let's face it, for a very, very long time? Is it going to be easy for the Brits?
Well, I'll pick up the same point as Shashil said. Basically, the fat lady isn't singing yet, and I'm not referring to Theresa May here, I'm referring to Britannia. We haven't got a decision, so I don't think we should be debating what could or would happen till we have more concrete details. But at the minute we have Theresa May, who's gone out on her own and maybe probably annoyed the Europeans by going and making the visit to India.
We'll ask Veronica that.
Sorry?
We'll ask Veronica that.
Yeah, exactly. But actually, the UK has to be a great partner for India anyway, because culturally we understand each other. We've got the historical ties. We have the bureaucracy also. My dad came over in 1953. I'm a very proud Punjabi. He grew his business. He helped and sent money back to the family. And the UK has always been welcoming to all kind of migrants, and especially from the Indian subcontinent. And this is probably the point that I want to raise, is that the UK and India have to be about empowering human capital, especially with the size of the Indian human capital. And this is where I think maybe with Europe we've been making some mistakes going down the free trade agreement route, and why it's taking so long, because that cultural understanding isn't there. And if I take one of the things that was done on the free trade agreement, there's a sustainable impact assessment that is done before any trade agreements are done. And the sustainable impact assessment looks at various different criteria as to how it's going to affect India and how it's going to affect Europe. But it's only done on the formal sector. So 92% of the economy was completely ignored in India. That means we didn't look at women, we didn't look at agriculture, we didn't look at the fisher folk, we didn't look at the rag pickers. We ignored the hawkers, the street hawkers. So basically we've ignored billions of people.
But Madhi, also FTAs do that. I mean,
This is part of the problem, and with the FTA, and in this respect, this is where we've got to change, because as nations we have a duty of care going forward, and in trade we should be dealing equitably. So we have to make sure that we are not going to cause poverty. And I think one of the things that trade, just looking at big business, could have an implication of creating more poverty and more distress for those who are not at the top of the ladder. So when Theresa May goes and says, we only want the rich business people, or we only want highly qualified people, this I don't think we can continue to do. And I'm wondering if we can create a system where we can give some kind of visa where the people come on mode 4, or work in the UK or wherever, and then are trained and then go back to put the skills back into the Indian economy to grow the Indian economy. And that's what I would like to see. And I think that's what's important. We have to look at human capital and value human capital.
it's interesting because one of the things that was on the table was special visas for business people. Indian business people apparently can now get special visas to go to Britain. That was one thing, but students not yet. So it's quite.
No, but at the same time, Charlotte, we're offering this to the Chinese anyway. So this is the hypocrisy. India is always playing second to China when it comes to Europe, always. And despite being built on democracy and human rights, we still favour China over India. And I think India will not accept this. And so Mr. Modi now is in key position. He can put out his hands. Okay, what's the UK offering? What's Europe offering? and let me take what's best for India.
Actually, that was an echo I heard. I heard that in Mumbai as well. Yes, Shushi, do come in very quickly here.
Just a very quick question. You know, when you talk about the special visa for businessmen, today, as an Indian businessman, I take a visa to come to UK. I get a 10-year multiple visa. What more special will I get?
Yeah?
Yeah, I'm wondering. I mean, and this has been in force for I think this is the second 10-year visa I have.
Okay. Well,
So it's like going into the 2 decades.
In politics, you package and repackage the same thing over and over again. Shishi, you should know that. You're a politician. Right. But repackaging is the buzzword. So, Pratik, for China and for India, Britain was seen as kind of a gateway for businesses, So you settled in, you invested, manufactured, did whatever in Britain, and then you had access to the single market. Britain, of course, wants to stay in the single market. Today, I think yes, tomorrow maybe no. But anyway, so how is that impacting on your members of your federation?
So when Prime Minister Modi came to India came to London last year at a press conference at the FCO, he specifically said that Indian companies see London in particular as a gateway to the UK and Europe. From our members, we've seen very much that the uncertainty has meant they haven't necessarily shut down businesses in the UK, but certainly investment decisions are postponed or other options are also being looked at. We've had a lot more courting done from other parts of Europe in terms of specific states of Flanders, Baden-Württemberg, and a few other places in Europe that have maybe beefed up some of their presence and the events they collaborate in India. In terms of whether Brexit has happened or not and what the post-Brexit trade deal could look like, I think doing a book review is very difficult without having read the book. So I think still we're a couple of years away from writing the first chapter. When David Cameron first went to India 10 years ago, November 2010, when his first visit as Prime Minister, he said that he wanted to double trade between the two countries within 5 years. That has probably gone up by about 10-15% instead of 100% over that 5-year period. And that has disproportionately been India selling more to the UK rather than UK selling more to India. In fact, last 2 years or 2.5 years, UK selling to India has fallen. And this has been, going back to Gareth's point earlier, that we have to look at what India wants to buy and what the UK wants to sell. India's economy is over very many gears. So if you look at professional services and financial services, maybe it's growing at 15+% a year. And many of us will be involved in those kind of sectors in the room. The rest of services may be growing at 10-11%. Manufacturing may be growing at 5%. Agriculture may be growing at 0%. The areas that Britain really wants to trade with India will be things like financial services, the opening up of the legal services market, and other high value-add services items. And that means you're only really tackling the very top of that services layer. And that's one of the reasons why the trade from the UK to India hasn't gone up as much as David Cameron has wanted. Liam Fox, the trade minister in the UK, has been very, very bullish about being able to get on a plane from anywhere in the world and negotiate a trade deal, whether it's Australia, whether it's New Zealand, whether it's India, whether it's anywhere else. I think focusing on an India-UK FTA is probably something for 2 or 3 years' time. There are much wider things, much wider considerations we can talk about, which can look at specific sectors or specific areas of collaboration. For example, immigration we've talked about quite a bit. The opening up the legal services market is something the UK would definitely want. It looks like that's again, not likely to happen anytime soon. But since David Cameron made that November 2010 announcement, the engagement from the UK in India has expanded. The diplomatic corps have expanded significantly. So the number of deputy high commissions has expanded significantly. The diplomatic corps and the trade and staff that UK has in India is the largest anywhere in the world, even bigger than in China. The UK India Business Council, which is the main UK body to promote trade with India, it had 2.4 million of funding last year, 2.5 million the year before. So there's been some substantial presence and substantial resources devoted to it. Despite that, the trade statistics haven't gone up, and maybe that's the wrong lens to look at the relationship through. On the investment side, things have been significantly more robust. But post-Brexit, like we heard, that the value of Indian investments in the UK have fallen by 20% in the last 3 months. That's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is if you want to come into the UK market now and want to acquire, things are 20% cheaper. So it very much depends on which side of the coin you look at. The last couple of days, there were some good meetings that happened. The UK-India CEOs Forum that met, so a dozen or so CEOs from both sides meeting together. Some specific collaborations around smart cities. Again, the smart cities collaboration is very much UK selling architecture and Internet of Things and other technology-related services to India. There are some interesting things happening there. India really needs areas of collaboration, not just with UK, but others, where jobs are created, where the 70-80% of India that isn't involved in the high growth services sector, that 70-80% of India really benefits. And that's something that the Indian Prime Minister and the Indian public and the Times of India and everybody else will be really looking at. And that's what I think whenever the follow-ups to this trade visit happen, I think those are the things in the background, apart from immigration, the two countries will probably work on a lot more carefully.
Yeah, Pratik, one thing I find, so India is looking for jobs, investments for jobs, and the UK is looking for investments for jobs as well. Isn't there some kind of a lack of sort of understanding on who does what first? Because, Make in India is about manufacturing for the army of young unemployed people in India, and the UK needs jobs too. So aren't they sort of at cross purposes, these two?
Yeah, yes and no. So in 2011, India added about 411,000 new jobs to its economy. Last year, it added less than half of that. So at a time when 1 million new graduates join the workforce every year, to add 200,000 less jobs over the last 5 years, that's a big challenge for the economy. Where UK has been very good in terms of working with India has been the financial services innovation. So a lot of so-called masala bonds are listed in London, and many more are in the pipeline. Many more green bonds are in the pipeline as well. And I don't know the quantum of these, but well over £1 billion or $1 billion worth over the last 6 months and the next few months coming up. But those things are more about Indian companies raising cheaper finance in London than about hiring an extra 50,000 people in India. So I think both countries mean very well, and there's an established set of partnerships, relationships that are there. But I think it's like a marriage. You have different events, and you patch up, and then you redo your vows and everything else. And so it's much more to do with that long-term marriage and relationship. Brexit may be a blip, or it may be an opportunity. We don't know what Brexit means. Theresa May's view is Brexit means Brexit. Yeah. I think we've heard on the panel, Brexit means we're not quite sure.
Exactly, thank you. So a marriage, but also a divorce. In this case, it's definitely a divorce when it happens. So Veronica, the European Union had a rather breakthrough meeting with Narendra Modi in March this year. It was a summit that was held after 4 years. Ambitious agenda was agreed, and some of the work on that ambitious agenda has actually begun. So will Brexit, when it happens, will that sort of derail what you're doing with India as the European Union of 28 at the moment?
Well, Shada, I'm pleasantly surprised that to see that colleagues around the table we're all seem to be on the same wavelength. First of all, let's start with the reality of the situation. The referendum in Britain has changed nothing from a legal point of view or a practical point of view as regards EU membership of the EU, or the UK membership of the EU. The UK remains a member of the EU. It's constrained by it has all the rights and all the obligations of an EU member. And that will continue to be the case until it leaves. Similarly, the EU's laws continue to apply to the UK and in the UK. In this situation, then we have a process whereby we have the Article 50 will have to be invoked. Theresa May has indicated that that will be sometime in March, perhaps, certainly not before March 2017. Then we have a 2-year period from the invocation of the Article 50, a 2-year period in which to negotiate the withdrawal of the UK from the EU. And of course then there is the question of the future relations of the UK with the EU. Now that 2-year period can also be amended and extended if other member states agree. So we're not looking at something happening overnight. This is a long process. And as I said, I'm pleasantly surprised that we all feel there's no need to be precipitate about making predictions about what kind of Brexit we're going to have, because we're not there yet. It's a long road, and we should be cautious in approaching this and take it step by step. Also, the negotiations will be in very good hands. President Juncker has appointed Michel Barnier to head a task force on negotiations for Brexit.
Is he going to speak English?
That's something you have to check with him. But I think certainly this is something that will be guided very much from the top down, and we can safely say this is a process that will be handled very carefully and with regard to all of the sensitivities of all parties. Then we have had, of course, in Bratislava earlier this year, we have a 27 states meeting, and they made it very clear that they want to continue to have a EU, they want to continue to have a euro, and so they're very clear that nothing has changed. So if I come to your question then as regards India, I mean, we have a very long-standing relationship with India. India is a strategic partner. We have 4 strategic partners in Asia Pacific. One is China, one is Japan, one is India, and one is South Korea. India is an extremely important partner for us, which is not to say that we haven't, we talk about marriages or any long-term relationship, we have our bumps along the road, and we have warmer and cooler moments, shall we say, but nevertheless, it is a very long-standing relationship. I don't think anything is going to change in that. I was at a conference in the Indian Embassy just last Friday with my managing director, Gunnar Wiegand. We were discussing, it was a panel discussion on a study that has been conducted on greater EU-India cooperation on security. And the ambassador was very urbane and very open in saying, you know, we are a long-standing partner of the EU. This is not going to change. We are comfortable with the EU. And I think this is very true, that whatever the ups and downs of the relationship, there is a comfort in the permanence and the long-standing nature of the relationship. So I don't see anything changing there. On the contrary, if I can echo again one of the previous speakers, I see many more areas of cooperation which may open up, including trade, but also beyond trade, including in the security domain and facing global challenges for us with India. So I think our relationship, if anything, is likely to be even further grounded and solidified and consolidated over the forthcoming years. To come to your question, particularly on trade, yes, the EU pursuit of an FTA with India has been a slow process. There have been elements that we have been able to agree on, and elements that we have been less able to agree on. But we are certainly not abandoning this prospect. India remains a vital partner for us. I would say also that the EU is an absolutely vital market for India. We remain, if I can just give you some basic truths that remain, whether the UK is with the EU or outside it. The EU is the second largest economic single market, just after the USA. EU is the largest export market in the world for countries like India, even after Brexit. The EU will remain the largest destination and the greatest source of FDI flows in the world. And of course, in the area of development assistance, the EU will remain the world's leading donor. So my feeling is it's less. We have been, I think, from media and the tumultuous debate that followed the referendum in the UK, we have been led to believe that everything will be upheaval, the markets will be destroyed, nobody will be able to predict what will happen. I think we should maybe stop a moment and reflect. There is no need to panic. As I said, this is a slow process anyway. We have plenty of time to negotiate this. But also, there is so much that simply will not change, and we should take faith and take comfort in that there will be much that will remain the same.
Right, try telling that to the Daily Telegraph. But a very good point, Shishir, just before I open the floor to questions and comments from yourself, just India and the EU are now comfortable with each other, is what Veronica said. Is that comfort zone something you feel? Because in the past you've said, we don't really need the FTA with the EU, we do business where business is, etc. Is that comfort zone there?
What I have said in the past, and I'll repeat, even today, after years and years of negotiation, we don't have an FTA. For whatever, I'm not getting into a blame game, but we don't have. Yet, for India, EU is our second largest trading partner. For us, GCC is number one, and then is EU. So what does that mean? Our trade on a bilateral basis with all the EU countries is there. Now, if the negotiation keeps going on, sometimes you lose interest.
Ask Canada.
Well, thank you for pointing that out. But from an Indian point of view, we have 800 million youth. You can't ignore this. They need jobs. We will trade with UK. Brexit or no Brexit, we will trade with EU. Again, Brexit or no Brexit. We need FDI from both these areas. And India is today also a net exporter of capital. So as far as we are concerned, we will like to not only do business, but increase our business with all the geographies.
Right. Gareth, the trade has always been a competence of the EU. It's been one of the cherished competencies and something that the EU has done, the European Commission has done. And Britain doesn't even have the expertise, or didn't at least a few months ago, and was scrambling to find people to work in the Trade Department. Can Britain do all these FTAs with Australia, New Zealand, the US, India? Is there a capacity there?
Not at the moment. I think a friend of mine who I used to work with was headhunted to work as chief economist at the Ministry for exiting the European Union, and in the end he pulled out because he said the process was was shambolic. So, no, and this is, I think this is a realization that's sort of happening, that all the things that we're going to be negotiating are things that aren't the UK's competency. Okay, we have no competency in it for 40 years, which makes it very difficult. And yeah, just going back a step, there were a lot of, the Director of Public Prosecutions is now investigating the claims that were made during for the Leave campaign, for the point you made.
Right. But Mandy, there was one good thing that I thought that Theresa May had done, that in her trade delegation, she had SMEs with her. She had a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises. That's what the headlines were saying.
Yeah, backbone of the economy. Backbone of the economy, both for Europe and for India. And this has to be the focus. I asked the question earlier in the last session. The frugal innovation, the development of the entrepreneurs and the support for the entrepreneurs, and it has to be from inside the countries, both inside the UK, inside Europe, and inside India. And for me, that is much more valuable than the trade agreements. If you add together the amount of money that Europe has spent on TTIP, on CETA, on the FTA, on the EU-India FTA, just those three, How many businesses could we have supported? How many jobs could we have created? Because it's not the big companies that are creating the jobs, it's the small companies. And it's the small companies that are building the communities and investing in the communities, and they're the one driving the changes, not the big companies and not the politicians. And until we learn that, we are going to keep making this mistake. And actually, I think in the long term, we're killing trade. And this is also why we've got this rich-poor divide getting bigger across the world. We have to. I mean, at the end of the day, I like Shishi's analysis of Europe and how Europe was formed. It was a 27-year-old entrepreneur, Jean Monnet, who had the idea in the first place. So we have to go back to basic entrepreneurship. So I was pleased she took small businesses. We have to stop big business capturing the limelight and just taking the deals for themselves.
Thank you. I think a lot of people here probably will agree. But do you want to comment on that?
We can clap, no?
Doug, you should be clapping too.
So I think that there were 33 businesses that went with her. SMEs, you're right. Probably a third of them were Indian origin. So they probably had, in fact, some of them most definitely already have connections in India. And some of the other businesses that went have been trying to work in India for many, many years. I think in terms of, if you compare when Prime Minister Modi was in London and you compare Theresa May going to India, the level of interest that was generated when he came here, the level of interest generated in Delhi this week, has been very different. The number of businesses that have gone with each have been very different. The number of trade agreements or contracts that have been signed, the quantum of that has been very, very different. The three that were announced when she got on the flight were, I think, £1 million, £15 million, and then a third one that was somewhere in the middle. So, yes, the SMEs are on the plane. But if Prime Minister is going and saying, this is India's my favorite country in terms of visiting another country after becoming Prime Minister, and a £1 million deal is signed, that's loose change. I think you do need the bigger companies there as well, and I think that's part of the reason. So actually, backtracking, Peter Mandelson, after he had his European role, he set up a think tank or set up a consultancy, and they published a very interesting report a few months back that said that because India is the 19th most important trading partner for the UK, in terms of the top 10 or so countries that the UK should worry about post-Brexit, India was below Switzerland, it was below Italy, it was below pretty much everybody. I think it was definitely not in the top 10, maybe it was in the top 15 or so. So in a sense, Theresa May going to India was partly about the SMEs and the innovation and the tech and everything else, but it was also targeting the Indian diaspora in the UK. 1.5 million Indian diaspora that maybe 15 years ago were very much Labour supporters, and certainly over the last two elections have moved very significantly to the Conservative Party. So I think looking at it from that perspective, I'm sure regardless of what was said about immigration, the visit did fulfill some objectives.
Okay, thank you very much. Veronica, do you want to come in very quickly or anything? Otherwise, I'll open the floor perhaps.
No, I'm happy to. Please.
Yeah, please. So just please, short, snappy questions. Please identify yourselves, and we've got a wealth of information here from our panelists, so happy to take questions now. I can go on and on, but that's not the point of this exercise. Yes, Nawab. Yes? Yes. Nawab first? Nawab, there's no... I don't think there's a microphone. Yeah,
Analyst from India based in Brussels. In the morning session, we heard one speaker saying that the referendum BREXIT was welcomed in India. So I would like to ask the panel here if you share with this view. And second matter which was raised about the problems in the EU FTAs is that a lot of non-trade issues are included in the European Union's FTAs. And this is a major hurdle and problem. Now with the Gulf Cooperation Council, 20 years of negotiations were stopped 2 years ago.
25.
More, 20. 2 years ago they were stopped. And with India, now 2 years, after 7 years, 2 years, no talks. We saw what happened nearly with Canada, it nearly collapsed. We are seeing now in the US, a lot of protests and oppositions. My third observation here is that the British Prime Minister herself has said that for her, Brexit is Brexit. And by March, she said, by March, she is going to trigger the famous Article 50. So I do not know, I heard here some skepticism if and when it's going to happen, Brexit is going to happen. And even in 2 years, if there's a negotiation doesn't succeed, then UK will be out of the EU. It's in the treaty. So I do not know why the skepticism is there that UK will not give EU.
Okay, Nawab, thank you very much. Let's take another few questions and then Maurice, please.
Hi, my name is Maurice Fermont. I'm an advisor on trade and investment at Business Europe. I just want to ask a question, maybe make a comment to you, Mali, on the question of SMEs and trade, because the impression I get from you is that trade benefits big business, and trade or trade agreements are negative for SMEs, and we don't need them, and things like this. But the way we see it is that actually multinational companies don't need FTAs because they have the resources, the presence, the lawyers, the experts to be present in pretty much every international market. And it's in fact small and medium-sized enterprises that struggle to get access to markets where there are differing regulations or other kinds of barriers. And similarly, I think SMEs also work in the supply chains of larger companies. They supply larger companies. And so I think even though you see that the bigger companies are more visible in pushing for trade, I think they are sort of the trailblazers that also make the route easier for small and medium-sized enterprises because FTAs don't discriminate. The benefits that are negotiated are applicable to all companies. You also find that the EU has a number of SME internationalization instruments. And let's not forget that the European Union itself is one massive FTA. And a lot of the SMEs in the EU trade only in the single market. And I think once, or if the UK leaves the single market, I think SMEs will have the shock of their life when they realize what kind of terms of trade they will have between the UK and the EU. So I would say, don't undervalue the value of FTAs.
Thank you for that. Anyone else wants to come in at this point? I don't see a question. Shishu, why don't you start the first question? Was Brexit welcomed in India?
Well, freedom of speech, you can say what you want. And one thing, let's not forget that India has a special relationship with the UK. We even play cricket. And I wouldn't make too much out of that comment. At the end of the day, the exit, as I said earlier, if it happens, when it happens, is the sovereign will of the people. I am not capable of saying March 17, how can I contradict the Prime Minister after all she is the leader of the House? But if I read the judgment which was given few days back, it's still a far cry. But this point about SMEs, they are the ones who need the FTAs more. I mean, that's a very, very interesting observation and very correct. So obviously the big boys don't need it. I mean, we have quite a few even legal battles going on, the famous Apple case. But does it mean that there's a motive in stopping the FTAs? I don't think so. But from an Indian point of view, I'll repeat again, we need the trade.
Gareth?
Yeah, I mean, on the point of India wanting Brexit, I was talking to quite a senior Indian diplomat recently, and I put this to him, and I said, I hear you're quite keen on Brexit. And he said, you know us, Gareth, you're leaving the EU, hooray! You're remaining in the EU, hooray! And I thought that kind of put it quite nicely, really. As it wasn't very reassuring. So, yeah.
Fanny, there's a special question to you.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm an entrepreneur, so I believe very strongly in trade, very strongly in trade. I believe in the benefits of trade. I believe in the job creation, the wealth creation, the innovation creation, the skills and the training it delivers. But it has to be equitable trade. It has to be fair to all those involved. And I can only speak, I worked on a bit on TTIP and I worked a bit on CETA. I know that they're there, but the one I know most is India. First of all, it never accounted for any small company, neither in Europe, neither in India. Civil society was not consulted. It's well known, it's well documented. There was even a court case with Transparency International that big business in Europe had access to the trade agreement before anybody, even the politicians. So I believe really strongly that if we engage the small businesses in the trade agreements also, then everybody benefits, then they have their say also. But we know, especially on the India trade agreement, it was so controversial that they even had to release the text on pharmaceuticals because there was a fear that generic medicines were not going to be accessible to the poor or to others. There was the agriculture. There's the worry about access to seeds. There's the worry on TTIP about Monsanto and the pressure of Monsanto. I'm sorry, I don't want bio foods, genetically modified foods in my thing. And this is not what SMEs are creating. SMEs aren't developing these sort of things. Retail. You know, the retailers, there was a big backlash against the European retailers coming in to India because they were going to displace so many of the street hawkers. In the case of recycling, the big companies that do all the recycling and the rubbish clearance and all that were going to displace those people who were the rag pickers who recycle the stuff on the streets. So where were we going to create the jobs? Where were we going to create the training? You can't create these sort of millions of people were going to be put out of work. So if we could bring in SMEs on the same negotiations and say, okay, big business is going to come in, it's going to give these jobs to SMEs and these assurances to SMEs, and the SMEs are going to employ those on the bottom, then fine. But there's none of that. That isn't evident in any of these trade agreements, and that's all I'm asking for, that it's fair. And I accept that you're saying that big businesses can do this on their own. Well, why are big businesses leading the trade agreements then? Why aren't the small businesses around the table with the politicians and the trade negotiators instead of the big businesses? Because if you can do this all on your own, then you don't need us. Big Business Europe represents both big and small businesses. So does Eurochambres, FICCI is there, also CIA. But what about those people who represent me, where I'm not a member, but I don't have a voice? And this, for me, is the biggest thing. I need to make sure that as a European, with European values of democracy, the protection of human rights, that I am not going to increase the poverty of anybody anywhere in the world when I accept to sign a trade agreement. And in this, I'd also like, I know this wasn't part of the question also, but in this I'd also like to say, maybe something Veronica also wants to say later, because is the issue of the games that the European Union is playing also with India. So we are giving GSP preference to Pakistan. We are giving GSP plus preference to Bangladesh. The human rights abuses in those countries, the fact that European companies are going in there without protecting the workers in many of those factories. is something that we have a responsibility for, and we have to now look at this and start saying, if we are giving preferences to countries, then why are we doing it when they're abusing the mandate that they've been given? And these are the things that trade is not there to destroy people's lives, please.
I think one of the arguments that is used on the issues of GSP is that you incentivize countries by giving them, and then you monitor to what extent they're actually complying with the conventions on labour standards, etc. that they've signed. But you made a good point.
This isn't happening.
Well, that's exactly.
This isn't happening, and so this I think is important,
Right.
because it was a tool to leverage India to sign the trade agreement.
Right.
If
Thank
we
you.
look at it
Veronica, do you want to respond to this? But yeah, go ahead.
If I may, just a couple of issues to respond to the gentleman here who raised the question of what he perceived as scepticism that Brexit will take place around the table here. I don't think it's so much that we're sceptical, we're simply saying we should not be too precipitate in trying to imagine what the outcomes will be and to speculate, because it is a process and we're not there yet. Article 50 has not even yet been invoked. I don't think we necessarily say it will happen or it will not happen. It's simply that perhaps we need to take it step by step and wait until the Article 50 has been invoked and then to negotiate the process. But it is a process. Secondly, to come to free trade agreements, I mean, the objective of all free trade agreements is to create a level playing field for all. To have the same access to markets, to have the same norms and standards, to have equal opportunity for small and large business. And that's the objective of trade agreements. So I think they benefit both large companies and small companies. That at least is what they set out to do.